So what I want to talk about is an idea that came up in the working group session on Monday and has been mentioned a few times at this conference previously. The idea is to have a wrapper element for things that are related to the issue in which an article publishes. Issue, sometimes it's not an issue that the issue article appears in. So one of the prompts for this is that JATS 1.1d3 introduces a new element called volume issue group to handle some edge cases that are not handled very well today in JATS. One example of the edge case was a volume that had a second set of numbers applied because the journal restarted its volume numbering somewhere in its history and continued printing both sets of numbers. This is something that apparently PMCs encountered. I know it's something that we've encountered in our own archiving projects. Second use case was in a journal where a single issue spans more than one volume. I'll show the example a bit later, but it's a rare case, but it does happen. So the idea to add volume issue group seems like it addresses these needs, but I'm wondering if we can do something a little bit different that possibly is more useful in different scenarios. So as is often the case, abstraction increases flexibility and usefulness. This is a concept that I believe JATS embraces wholeheartedly. If we can abstract the article volume and issue information into something that's a bit more generic, it could be more descriptive and useful. So for an example, an article that publishes in a volume and issue, that's something that JATS does easily now. It's very standard. But if an article publishes in different variations of an issue, I'm not talking about republishing the article in a different issue, but where the issue actually has different forms, and sometimes the article actually has different pagination in different forms of the issue. That's something that is not handled well in JATS, and sometimes information is lost. The other example that I already mentioned is where we're digitizing something that was published years ago, and the volume numbering is something that's not really standard, doesn't work well in today's systems. When we encounter this as we're digitizing content, we try really hard to do something that's going to make sense to the people who might be trying to find the content, but sometimes just to get the content online and make it work, we have to change the way it was published, and we don't like doing that. We'd like to have a solution that's better, to at least preserve the metadata in the XML if we can't display it with our current systems. And possibly new publication models might arise where articles are grouped in different ways. Currently, the ways of doing that are to use article categories to identify the article as belonging to something other than a volume and an issue, or to keep that metadata outside the XML. Those are both good solutions. Maybe we can offer another one. Another reason for kind of asking for a new element for issue metadata is separation of concerns. Article metadata is defined as an element to contain information about the article. Information about the issue belongs somewhere else. It belongs in journal meta. Information about the issue probably should be somewhere else too. And I believe this would actually help organization. If you're looking at the schema for the first time, having all this information about volume and issue in which the article publishes seems a bit awkward in issue meta or in article meta. And looking back as a footnote here, and on 3.0, they introduced a new set of grouping tags to collect together related elements. This is kind of in that same spirit of increasing organization within the tag set. So the solution I'm suggesting is to create a new element, collection meta, which would describe the volume or issue and potentially other things. Make it repeatable for those cases where it needs to repeat, and treat it at the same level as you would article meta or journal meta. Here's a model based on green DTD, where collection meta is alongside journal meta and article meta. It can contain all of the elements that would define a journal issue or a conference, and it has a content type attribute so you can distinguish multiple types of collection meta. So let's try to go through a couple use case examples, starting with the two that prompted the volume issue group element. This is an example where an issue has two sets of numbering because the journal restarted its numbering. The second use case example from the change request that was submitted to JATS is here tagged with collection meta, where we have an issue that spans more than one volume. The issue at the same time is 51.4 and 52.1. So another use case that I've seen happen where a issue is published online, the article receives online pagination or an e-location ID, then the article is published in a combined printed issue that spans multiple issues, and it receives new pagination in the print edition that prints alongside the original pagination that you see online. That's something that we aren't really able to capture in the current tag set. We just kind of have to say, okay, do that for print, but I'm sorry, we can't capture it in the XML, even though our standard is that the XML has to contain everything that's in the print. Another use case example is where an article publishes in multiple forms. It'll come out as the author accepted version published online. Then later come out as an ahead of issue version that's final for all intents and purposes, but it just doesn't have page numbers assigned because it's not part of an issue yet. Then later the issue comes out paginated in an issue. It's really the same article. Nothing in journal meta should have to change. All that issue metadata that's being added because the article is now paginated in an issue could be stored somewhere else, possibly collection meta, without touching article meta. Some potential other use cases. Currently there is a solution within JATS for section headings, multiple multiple examples of tagging in fact, but collection meta might be another place to put that information. Journals that are repackaged and sold as books. Potentially conference metadata might go in a collection that's other than a journal issue. So want to ask the question here, get people's opinions. Is this a good idea to add the collection meta tag to JATS? If we add it to JATS, is it something that people would use? That's kind of a big question to me. Should we submit this as a request for JATS 1.1? And is it solving the same problem as volume issue group? Are both elements needed? So kind of want to open up to questions or comments if we can. Bruce, I think you were first.
Bruce Rosenblum from Monera. This is interesting. I'm reserving judgment on what I think about it because I want to ponder it a bit. But just sort of to extend this out, say this was added in JATS, would you have similar problems with deposit of metadata to Crossref or with PubMed indexing some of these unusual constructs that you've shown us?
I think because we pull data out of JATS to put it into the metadata format that Crossref requests or that PMC requests, for example, it wouldn't be a problem.
But which of the models would you, say you've got some of those really bizarre cases or essentially multiple publication situations, pre-pub and so on, what would you actually deposit to Crossref or to PubMed?
I think the best addition available if the element is repeating. So for example, let's get back to an example here, where we have a content type issue and content type print combined issue. I think we would pull out the content type issue and have that as the version that we normally use. The other versions of collection meta could be there if we need to capture that information for print or to preserve an original archived version.
But if you only deposited one of those to Crossref and the author of a new paper cited it by the one you didn't deposit to Crossref, doesn't that compromise DOI lookup?
It potentially could, and that's why I think the fact that JATS only allows one page number or e-location ID for an article is good because it makes that linking easier. It kind of prevents that ambiguity. But I've seen people actually do this in journal articles where an article is published and it has two sets of page numbers or two sets of issue identification. So I'm really trying to capture what's actually being done and then find a way we can reliably pull out the metadata that we want people to use to cite the article.
Yeah, because one of the things with my working group hat on is to what extent does the working group want to add something to the DTD that may encourage bad practice? Yes, it may be done, but it may not, or I should say, it may not encourage best practice. And that's one of the questions that we do wrestle with. So,
Yeah.
so it's helpful to have the discussion. Thanks.
So, Chuck Kosher from Crossref. I would just say that, recommend that if this is truly a real-world problem and that JATS is the right place to address it, and so if it is a real-world problem and JATS does address it in a mechanism like this, then people down the food chain, which is what Crossref really is, will adjust. And so we'll certainly adapt to it. So I'd say if it merits a solution, if it's a real problem, we should move forward with it.
Thank you. I guess Debbie and Marco, you had your hand up.
Oh, Jeff Beck, NLM. The multiple publication problem, I'm afraid if we solve it this way, we're going to only be solving a very little slice of it, because if you're talking about you're going to have multiple publications and the only thing that changes is the collection metadata, we're going to have cases where we're going to have multiple publications and we see real versions of articles. And I think that probably both of those things are going to have to be solved in the same way. And I'm trying to convince everyone I know that JATS is not the place where that should happen. I'm still thinking that the JATS article should be an instance of a version of an article, and things that happen outside of that, where you might have 10 of them that are all the same article. I don't know, maybe Chuck will deal with that, but
Yeah, this
I
is.
don't know.
Yeah, this is kind of within our workflow. We have multiple versions of the article that go online in succession as the article is produced towards a final version. I think other publishers are doing something similar. I've seen, as we kind of tried to adopt JATS for ourselves, we didn't see a clean way to handle this in JATS. We saw various creative uses of the issue tag, which we didn't really feel comfortable with, and we created our own element in our internal schema. So we kind of extended JATS to deal with this use case. If this collection meta had been available, we probably wouldn't have superset. We probably would have used it instead. Debbie?
Could you go back? You had a content model for this collection meta. And yeah, my real worry here is I don't see why you stopped there. Why can't I have different keywords? Because one of the articles didn't have anything but the author keywords, and then we sent it off to 3 different agencies, and now we have the author keywords and 2 different keywords made by other groups. I don't see where you stop it. I don't see why it can't just be repeating article meta, and that way I think lies madness. And I can't see why, you can just have a bunch of abstracts and say, well, this is the abstract for the first one and this is the abstract. You can do that. But why can't I repeat keywords? I know I can repeat subject groups because they're likely to be different. That's the whole point. We made a different issue. The subject groupings are going to be different. I was comparing this to article meta, and I couldn't see the boundaries clearly.
I would say the boundary is anything that is intrinsic to the article and probably would not change just by the article being in a different group of articles would be stuck within article meta. Anything that's related to the construct in which the article is published, for example, the issue would go under collection meta.
When we started JATS, we looked at a bunch of journal DTDs in one journal schema, and there was a common metadata schema at the time that divided things into issue metadata and article metadata and journal metadata. And by design, at least 10 years ago, it seemed to us that people were going to be doing what you're doing. There won't be a single issue. Issues will be going away. Some people don't use them at all. Some people use multiples. And so we said, we don't think we can identify this as apart from the article meta. And you haven't convinced me yet that you can. Thank you.
All right.
I think, Marco,
Well, we need to.
Okay.
So thank you.
well, thank you.